Shame flickered across her face, but it was late shame, the kind that arrived after the damage could no longer be hidden. "You were Richard's firstborn," she said. Daniel's mouth tightened. "I was a child." "I know." "No," Daniel said, stepping closer. "You knew I was a threat. That is not the same as knowing I was a child." Vivian looked down. Everett glanced at Daniel, and something shifted between them. Not brotherhood yet. Not forgiveness. But recognition. They had both been used by the same lie in different directions. Daniel had been erased because he was Richard Hale's blood. Everett had been crowned because he was not. Amelia stepped into the conservatory, though Clara could see how weak she still was. "The lawyer," Amelia said, "Henry Whitcomb, he called me the day before I disappeared. He said Richard Hale left a sealed statement before he died. He said it named Daniel as his son and exposed the foundation accounts." Everett looked up sharply. "Why did he call you?" "Because he said I was the only person you trusted enough to hear it from," Amelia replied. "He was afraid if he went directly to you, Vivian or Preston would stop him first." Daniel looked at the broken box on the floor. "He never came." Amelia shook her head. "No, Reeves intercepted me at the hospital before I could meet him." Clara remembered the hospital corridor again. The white coat, the cold order, the way Amelia's room had suddenly emptied of safe people. "Reeves moved Amelia here," Clara said. "Preston controlled the records. Vivian controlled the house." Everett looked at the birth certificate. "And my life was the payment between them." Vivian reached toward him. "Everett, please." He stepped away. That movement hurt her more than a shout would have. "I loved you," she said. Everett's voice broke slightly. "You loved owning me." Vivian began to cry, but no one rushed to comfort her. Some tears asked for mercy. Others arrived when consequences finally found a locked door. From the corridor, the security chief returned. "Sir," he said carefully, "Preston is secured in the east foyer. Dr. Reeves is with the officers. Mrs. Hale will need to be transporting soon." Everett nodded without looking away from the document. Then Noah spoke. "Daddy." Everett turned immediately. Noah's eyes were wide. "Are you still our daddy?" The question cut through every adult argument with pure child fear. Everett dropped to one knee before him. "Yes," he said, "always." Nora stepped forward, tears gathering. "Even if your paper is different." Everett's face crumpled, but he held himself together for them. "Paper does not decide who loves you." Rosie, half asleep in Clara's arms, lifted her head and added softly, "Mama is Mama, even with no paper." The conservatory went silent. Clara swallowed hard. Amelia looked at Rosie, then at Clara, and her eyes filled again. Daniel bent down and picked up another photograph from the floor. This one showed Richard Hale holding baby Everett while Daniel stood beside him, smiling proudly. He handed it to Everett. "Whatever the paper says," Daniel said, "he held you like you were his." Everett stared at the photograph. Richard Hale's face was younger, softer, alive with a tenderness Everett had almost forgotten. "He knew?" Everett asked. Vivian whispered, "Not at first." Everett looked at her. "He found out when you were 6, she said. After he started searching for Daniel again, he uncovered the altered certificate. Preston told him everything." Everett's voice hardened, "And Richard kept me." Vivian frowned through tears. "Of course he kept you, he loved you, that was what made it worse." Daniel looked up. Vivian continued, her voice cracking. "Richard said Daniel was his son by blood, and Everett was his son by love, and both truths could live in the same house. He wanted to bring Daniel home. He wanted to confess the altered records, repair the trusts, and clean the foundation. He said the Hale name would survive only if it became honest." Amelia whispered, "That is why he died before he could do it." Vivian did not answer. But the silence did. Everett's face went dark. Did you kill him? Vivian looked horrified. No. Reeves's voice suddenly echoed from the hallway. No one needed to. Everyone turned. Two officers were leading Dr. Reeves past the conservatory entrance, his hands restrained, but his mouth remained free enough to poison the air one last time. Richard Hale's heart was weak, Reeves said. Stress did the work people like Vivian were too afraid to do. Everett moved toward him, but Daniel stepped between them. Do not, Daniel said. Everett's breath shook. Reeves smiled faintly. There it is, the real Hale brother saving the fake one from ruining himself. Daniel turned to Reeves. No, he said, a brother stopping a brother from becoming like you. The words landed with unexpected power. Everett looked at Daniel. For the first time, something like gratitude passed between them. Reeves's smile faded as the officers pulled him away. Vivian lowered her head. The security chief waited by the door. Everett looked at the certificate again, then folded it carefully. Take her, he said. Vivian looked up sharply. Everett. He did not move. The officers entered. For 1 second, Vivian looked not at Everett, but at Noah, Nora, and Rosie. The children stood together near Amelia, and perhaps Vivian finally saw what her choices had done, not to the Hale name, but to the smallest people inside it. I am sorry, she whispered. Nora hid behind Amelia. Noah looked at the floor. Rosie only stared at Vivian with serious toddler eyes and said, You should say sorry to the singing lady. Vivian broke then. Not because a judge had spoken. Not because police had arrived. But because a child had understood the moral difference between regret and repentance. Vivian turned to Amelia. I am sorry, she said, voice shaking, for every year. Amelia did not forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she nodded once, because even a woman stolen from her life could refuse to let bitterness become her prison. The officers led Vivian away. The conservatory door closed behind her. For the first time, the Hale mansion had no matriarch standing guard over its lies. Only the people left to clean them up. Everett sat on the edge of a stone planter, still holding the old photograph. Daniel stood a few feet away, unsure whether to stay or leave. Clara saw it clearly. Both men were waiting for the other to decide what brotherhood meant now. Amelia touched Everett's shoulder. Richard wanted both truths to live in the same house. Everett looked at Daniel. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. That house nearly buried everyone. Then we rebuild it differently, Everett said. Daniel's expression guarded itself. I do not want your money. I am not offering money. What are you offering? Everett looked around the conservatory, the glass walls, the overgrown plants, the hidden exit, the place Amelia had remembered by the smell of orchids and fear. A beginning, he said, and the truth publicly. Daniel studied him. Then he looked at Clara. You still have the strongest spine in this house, he told her. Clara almost laughed through her exhaustion. I only wanted to survive the night. You did more than survive it, Daniel said. You carried the proof everyone else was too frightened to hold. Everett looked at Clara too. He stood and faced her fully. For 3 years, you raised my daughter when you had no reason to trust me, he said. You protected Amelia's evidence when it could have destroyed you. You walked into a ballroom full of people who would rather believe a rich liar than a poor witness. I owe you more than gratitude. Clara's first instinct was fear. Powerful people often used debt as a leash. Everett seemed to understand again. I will not repay you by deciding your life, he said. I will repay you by making sure no one else decides it for you. Amelia stepped beside Clara and touched Rosie's sleeping hair. Tomorrow will be difficult, Amelia said. The police, the press, the courts, the DNA tests, the foundation, the bank box. Clara nodded, but her throat tightened at the word DNA. Truth was necessary, but truth could still hurt. Rosie stirred and reached for her. Clara kissed her forehead. Amelia watched them, and there was no jealousy in her eyes. Only grief for the years stolen and respect for the woman who had filled them with love. Everett turned toward the security chief. No press leaves with half-truths. We release one statement tonight. Amelia West has been found alive. Criminal allegations involving the Hale Foundation are being turned over to authorities. Clara Bennett and her daughter are under my protection at their request, not my control. At their request, the chief asked. Everett looked at Clara. For once, the billionaire waited for the maid to choose. Clara lifted her chin. Yes, she said, at my request. The security chief nodded and left. For the first time since entering the mansion, Clara felt the floor beneath her feet belonged to her. Not because she owned it, because she was no longer hiding on it. Then Daniel bent down to gather the remaining items from the broken wooden box. As he lifted the torn lining, something small slid out and landed near Rosie's shoe. A brass key. Old. Heavy. Stamped with 3 letters. R.H.H. Everett recognized them instantly. Richard Hale's hidden initials, he said. Daniel turned the key over. I have never seen this. Amelia looked at it carefully. Maple Ridge Bank. Everett shook his head. No, bank keys are numbered differently. Mrs. Voss, who had stayed silently near the doorway, stepped forward with fear returning to her face. I know that key, she whispered. Everett looked at her. Mrs. Voss's voice dropped. It opens the nursery safe. Nora frowned. We don't have a safe in the nursery. Mrs. Voss looked toward the children's wing. No, she said, not your nursery. Everett's face changed. Daniel's did too. Mrs. Voss swallowed hard. The old nursery, the one sealed after Daniel was taken. A cold silence returned. Clara looked down the corridor, toward the part of the mansion no one had mentioned all night. Then Rosie opened her sleepy eyes and whispered one more sentence that made every adult turn pale. The boy in the old room wants his car back. In Daniel's hand was the small toy car from the wooden box. And somewhere inside the mansion, behind another sealed door, the old nursery waited. The old nursery was not on any tour of the Hale mansion. Guests saw the ballroom, the library, the fountain garden, and the portrait hall, but no one was ever shown the narrow corridor behind the east wing where wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the air smelled of dust, cedar, and things the family had chosen not to remember. Mrs. Voss led them there, with the brass key held in both hands. Everett walked beside Daniel, but neither man spoke. Amelia followed with Noah and Nora close to her, while Clara carried Rosie, who had fully woken now and kept staring ahead, as if someone unseen were getting her through the house. Every few steps, Rosie touched the blue necklace at her throat. Clara noticed. So did Amelia. At the end of the corridor stood a white door. It looked smaller than the others, almost harmless, but the old scratch marks around the lock told a different story. Daniel stopped walking. His face had lost color. Everett looked at him. Do you remember this room? Daniel swallowed, not clearly. Mrs. Voss wiped her eyes. You used to sleep here when your mother worked late. Richard wanted you close, even before he was brave enough to tell the world. Daniel looked at the small toy car in his hand. His voice became distant. There was a rug with roads on it. Mrs. Voss nodded, blue and green. A wooden horse near the window. Yes. Daniel's mouth tightened, and a music box that played too slowly. Mrs. Voss covered her mouth as tears slipped down her face. Everett stared at Daniel, and for the first time, jealousy was not in the room. Only sorrow. One brother had inherited the house. The other had been hidden inside it. Mrs. Voss placed the key in the lock. It resisted at first. Then it turned. The door opened with a tired groan. Dust floated in the beam of the hallway light. Inside, the old nursery remained almost untouched. A small bed stood against one wall, covered by a faded quilt. A wooden horse waited near the window. A cracked music box sat on a shelf. In the center of the room lay a rolled-up rug, its edges frayed with age. Daniel took one step inside, but stopped, as if the floor might collapse under memory. Rosie suddenly whispered, "He wants the car there." She pointed to the rug. Clara's arms tightened around her. "Who does?" Rosie looked at Daniel, the little boy. No one corrected her. No one laughed. After everything they had seen that night, even the impossible had become quieter than the truth. Daniel moved to the center of the room and unrolled the rug. The roads were still there. Faded blue. Faded green. Tiny painted houses, a bridge, a church, a train station, and a mansion drawn at the top of a hill. Daniel knelt slowly and placed the toy car on the road. The moment he did, the floor beneath the rug clicked. Everett's eyes sharpened. "There's something under it." He and Daniel pulled the rug aside. A square outline appeared in the wood. Not large, not obvious, but real. Everett crouched and ran his fingers along the groove until he found a small keyhole. Mrs. Voss handed him the brass key. This time it turned easily. A hidden floor compartment lifted open. Inside was a small metal safe. Noah whispered, "Another secret." Amelia held him closer. "The last one, I hope." Everett lifted the safe out and set it on the nursery table. It required a number code. For a moment, everyone stared at it. Then Daniel looked at the music box. "The song," he said. Everett frowned. "What song?" Daniel walked to the shelf and picked up the cracked music box. He wound it carefully. The tune began. Slow, thin, broken by age, but recognizable. Amelia gasped. It was the lullaby. The same melody Rosie had hummed to calm the twins. The same melody Amelia's mother had once sung to her. The same melody that had traveled through blood, memory, grief, and locked walls, until it brought every hidden truth into one room. Daniel stared at the music box. "My mother used to sing this." Amelia looked at him with surprise. "So did mine." Mrs. Voss nodded through tears. Grace Miller and Amelia's mother were sisters. The room went completely still. Clara looked from Daniel to Amelia. "You are family," she whispered. Amelia's lips parted. "Daniel is my cousin." Mrs. Voss nodded. "Your mothers were separated after a family dispute. Grace came to work here under her own name. Your mother married and moved away, but they never stopped writing to each other." Everett turned toward Mrs. Voss. "Why was this never said?" "Because when Grace was sent away, Vivian made sure every connection to her was treated like a stain," Mrs. Voss said. "And after Amelia came into your life years later, I did not know the connection at first. When I realized, Amelia had already started asking questions about Daniel." Daniel looked at Amelia. That new truth softened something in him. He had come as the forgotten son. Now he stood as the cousin of the woman he had unknowingly helped protect in the hospital. Amelia looked at Rosie. "That is why the song mattered," she whispered. "It belonged to both sides." Rosie nodded as if this made perfect sense. The song finds people. Everett stared at the safe. Then the code may be connected to the song. Daniel examined the music box. There were numbers scratched faintly beneath the lid. 1987. Mrs. Voss inhaled sharply. The year Grace disappeared. Daniel entered the code. The safe clicked open. Inside were three things: a sealed videotape, a stack of legal documents, and a handwritten letter addressed to both Daniel and Everett. Everett lifted the letter first. His hands shook slightly as he unfolded it. The handwriting was Richard Hale. He read aloud, "My sons, if you are reading this together, then the truth has survived the people who tried to bury it." Daniel looked down. Everett's voice roughened, but he continued. "Daniel, I failed you first. Everett, I failed you differently. One of you was denied my name, and one of you was trapped inside it. Neither of you deserved the lies adults built before you could speak." Amelia covered her mouth. Clara felt her own eyes burn. Everett paused, then forced himself to continue. "The estate was meant to be divided between you both, not because blood alone makes a son, but because truth must repair what pride destroyed. Daniel is my son by birth. Everett is my son by love. If Vivian or Preston alters these records, this letter and the attached documents must serve as my correction." Daniel closed his eyes. Everett lowered the letter. For years, his identity had rested on a name, a certificate, and a public story. Now the truth was stranger, but also kinder. Richard Hale had known. Richard Hale had chosen him anyway. Daniel spoke quietly, "Read the rest." Everett nodded and continued. "The Hale Foundation must be audited. If illegal accounts remain, expose them, even if the Hale name suffers. A name that survives by stealing from the helpless deserves to fall. A name that survives by protecting children may begin again." Clara glanced at Rosie, then at Noah and Nora. This was no longer only about inheritance. It was about what kind of family the children would grow up inside. Everett folded the letter carefully. Then he opened the legal documents. They included trust amendments, adoption acknowledgements, foundation audits, handwritten notes, and old transfer records linking Preston, Reeves, and Vivian to years of cover-ups. But at the bottom was a smaller file. Amelia's name was on it. Everett opened it and went still. "What is it?" Amelia asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Richard knew about you." Amelia frowned. "Me." Everett read the first page. He wrote that if I ever loved a woman strong enough to challenge the family, I should listen to her before the family taught me to fear her. Amelia's eyes filled. Everett looked at her. "I didn't listen fast enough." Amelia stepped closer. "You didn't know." "I knew my mother hated you," he said. "I knew you were afraid before you disappeared. I knew you asked questions, and I thought I had time to protect you later." His voice cracked. "But later became 3 years." Amelia took his hand. "Then do not waste the years that remain." That sentence changed him. Clara saw it. The billionaire who had spent the night reacting to horror finally became a man choosing what came next. Everett turned toward the old safe and lifted the videotape. "Can we play this?" Mrs. Voss nodded. "There is an old player in the library." Richard insisted on keeping it. They carried the tape back through the corridor. No one spoke on the way. The mansion felt different now. Not less grand. Less powerful. As if every secret revealed had stripped another layer of false authority from the walls. In the library, the security chief connected the old player to a screen while officers waited nearby. The tape crackled, flickered, and then Richard Hale appeared. He looked older than in the photographs, but younger than the dead man in Everett's memory. His hair was gray at the temples, his face tired, his eyes filled with urgency. "My sons," Richard said on the screen, "I do not know which of you will find this first, but I pray you find it together. Daniel sat slowly. Everett stood behind him. Richard continued. Daniel, I looked for you. I was told lies. I believed some too easily because powerful men often prefer pain that keeps them comfortable over truth that demands action. For that, I am sorry. Daniel's face crumpled, but he did not look away. Everett, you are mine because I chose you every day after I learned the truth. Do not let anyone make you feel lesser because of another man's blood. A father is not only the man who creates life. A father is the man who protects it, tells the truth to it, and refuses to use it as property. Clara looked down at Rosie. Rosie leaned against her shoulder and whispered, like Mama. Clara kissed her hair. On the screen, Richard took a breath. Vivian is afraid of disgrace. Preston is hungry for control. Reeves has already done harm in the name of medical discretion. If this recording is found after my death, trust no one who asks you to protect the family name before protecting a child. Everett lowered his head. Daniel wiped his eyes once, quickly. Richard's voice softened. There is one more truth. Grace Miller did not abandon Daniel. She tried to return for him. She was stopped, threatened, and forced to believe her son would be safer without her. If she is alive, find her. If she is gone, clear her name. Daniel looked up sharply. Grace may be alive, he whispered. Mrs. Voss pressed a hand to her chest. The tape continued. The last address I found for Grace was in Maine, under the name Grace Holloway. I could not confirm it before my health failed. Daniel, forgive me if this hope hurts you. Everett, help him carry it. The video flickered. Richard leaned closer to the camera. And to the woman my son may one day love. If you are watching this because you uncovered what I could not finish, then you are braver than this family deserves. Amelia began to cry silently. Richard's final words were slow and clear. Break the curse of silence. Give the children a house where truth is not punished. That is the only inheritance worth keeping. The screen went black. No one moved. The library felt like a chapel after a confession. Then Daniel stood. I need to find my mother. Everett nodded. We will. Daniel looked at him carefully. We. Everett met his eyes. Richard asked me to help you carry it. Daniel's face tightened. For a moment, Clara thought he would refuse. Then he nodded once. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a beginning. Amelia sat near the twins, exhausted but peaceful in a way she had not been all night. Rosie climbed down from Clara's lap and walked to Daniel. She held out the toy car. The little boy says you can keep it now, she said. Daniel crouched in front of her. His hand trembled as he took it. Thank you, he whispered. Rosie touched his cheek with the innocent seriousness that had already changed all their lives. You were not lost, she said. They just stopped looking. Daniel closed his eyes. Everett turned away, but Clara saw the tears he tried to hide. Outside the library, dawn began to pale the windows. The longest night in the Hale mansion was ending. But the truth had not finished demanding courage. The security chief entered quietly. Mr. Hale, he said, the press is gathering outside the gates. The police are asking for your formal statement. And the bank manager at Maple Ridge says box 714 can only be opened by 2 authorized names. Everett looked up. Which names? The security chief checked his notes. Amelia West, he said. Amelia straightened. Then he looked at Clara. And Clara Bennett. Everyone turned to the maid. Clara's breath caught. Maid. The security chief nodded. The authorization was added 3 years ago by Amelia herself. Clara looked at Amelia, stunned. Amelia's eyes filled with gratitude. I trusted you before I remembered how to trust anyone else, Amelia said. Everett looked from Amelia to Clara. Daniel held the toy car against his palm. Noah and Nora stood beside Rosie. And for the first time, Clara understood that she had not been a side character in a rich family's tragedy. She had been the bridge that kept the truth alive. But outside the gates, cameras waited. Inside the bank, another secret waited. And between both stood Clara Bennett, the poor maid whose name had been written into the final lock. By morning, the Hale mansion was surrounded. News vans lined the road beyond the iron gates, cameras pointed toward the estate, and reporters spoke into microphones as if they had been waiting years for a rich family's secrets to become public property. Inside the mansion, the servants moved quietly through rooms that no longer felt like rooms. They felt like crime scenes. The ballroom still carried the scars of the night before. Crushed roses near the staircase, broken glass beneath the long table, police tape near the west hallway, and empty champagne flutes left behind by guests who had arrived for charity but fled through scandal. Clara Bennett stood near the library window, holding Rosie's hand. She had not slept. None of them had. Rosie leaned against her leg, half awake, still wearing the blue teardrop necklace that had changed all their lives. Noah and Nora sat nearby on a velvet sofa, both wrapped in blankets, refusing to let Amelia move more than a few feet away. Amelia looked fragile in the morning light, but not broken. That mattered. For years, people had hidden her, silenced her, drugged her, and trapped her behind walls. But now she sat beneath open windows with her children's hands in hers and sunlight touching her face. Everett stood across the room with Daniel Cross and two attorneys, speaking in low voices. He no longer looked like a billionaire preparing damage control. He looked like a man preparing confession. That difference frightened the lawyers. "Mr. Hale," one of them said carefully, "a public statement before we review all legal exposure could be catastrophic." Everett looked at him. "For whom?" The lawyer hesitated. "For the company, for the foundation, for your personal reputation." Everett's eyes moved to Amelia, then to Rosie, then to Clara. "My reputation survived because innocent people were buried under it," he said. "Let it bleed." Daniel watched him without speaking. Something in the forgotten son's face softened, but only slightly. Daniel had spent too many years outside the gates to trust transformation after one night. Clara understood that. Pain did not become peace just because truth finally entered the room. Sometimes truth was only the first door. Mrs. Voss entered, carrying a tray of tea no one had requested. Her hands were steady now, but her face still carried the shame of secrets delayed too long. "The cars are ready," she said. Everett nodded. "Thank you." Clara looked up. "Cars." Amelia turned toward her gently. "Maple Ridge Bank." The words made the room tighten. Box 714. The hidden bank box Amelia had trusted to Clara's name 3 years earlier. Clara swallowed. "Now." Everett stepped closer, but not too close. Since the night before, he had been careful with distance, careful with words, careful not to let gratitude sound like command. "The police are sending an officer," he said. "The bank manager confirmed only you and Amelia can open it. We should retrieve whatever is inside before anyone connected to Preston tries to interfere." Clara looked down at Rosie. The child was tracing the edge of the necklace with one finger. "Will Rosie come?" Clara asked. Amelia's expression tightened with protective instinct, but Clara felt the same fear in herself. Rosie had already been through too much. Yet every time they tried to keep children away from truth, lies had grown stronger in the dark. Everett crouched before Rosie. "You can stay here with Noah and Nora," he said gently, "or you can come with your mama. No one will force you." Rosie looked at Clara first. Then Amelia. Then the twins. "Will the singing lady go?" she asked. Amelia smiled faintly. Yes. Rosie nodded. Then I go. Noah immediately stood. Then we go too. Everett opened his mouth, but Nora spoke before him. No more doors closing, she said. The adults looked at one another. That sentence ended the argument. A few minutes later, they left through the side entrance to avoid the press. Security surrounded the cars, but cameras still flashed beyond the gates as the small convoy moved down the drive. Reporters shouted Everett's name. Others shouted Amelia's. One voice shouted Clara's name too, and that startled her more than anything. Clara Bennett had spent most of her life being invisible. Now the world wanted to know why a maid's name opened a billionaire's vault. Rosie pressed her face to the car window. Why are they yelling? Clara brushed her daughter's hair back. Because they want answers. Rosie frowned. Do they ask nicely? Amelia, seated across from them, with Nora asleep against her side, gave a soft laugh. No, she said, not usually. Everett sat beside Noah, staring out the window. Daniel rode in the front passenger seat, holding the wooden box on his lap. He had refused a private car, and Everett had not pushed. The space between them was still careful, but at least they were traveling in the same direction. When they reached Maple Ridge Bank, police officers cleared the back entrance. The bank manager, Mr. Ellery, met them in a private corridor with a face too pale for his expensive suit. Mr. Hale, he said, then turned quickly. Miss West, Miss Bennett. Clara almost looked behind her. Miss Bennett sounded like someone else. Someone with authority. Someone expected. Mr. Ellery led them downstairs into a vault area that smelled of steel, paper, and cold air. Their footsteps echoed against the marble floor, and every sound seemed too loud. At the security desk, Amelia signed first. Her hand trembled. Clara signed beneath her. The guard compared both signatures to records on file, then scanned identification cards. Clara's ID looked painfully ordinary beside Amelia's, but the machine accepted both names with the same green light. That tiny fairness nearly made Clara cry. No title. No mansion. No bank account. Just a name. Accepted. The vault door opened. Inside, rows of metal boxes lined the wall. Mr. Ellery led them to box 714 and inserted the bank key. Then he stepped back. Both authorized holders must turn together, he said. Amelia looked at Clara. Clara nodded. Their hands moved at the same time. The lock clicked. Inside the box was not money. There were no diamonds. No bonds. No gold. Only documents, a small hard drive, a sealed envelope, and a photograph. Amelia reached for the photograph first. The moment she saw it, her knees weakened. Everett caught her arm. What is it? He asked. Amelia turned the photo around. It showed Amelia in a hospital bed, pale but smiling through exhaustion. In her arms was newborn Rosie. Beside her stood Daniel Cross in a maintenance uniform, holding a clipboard like a man pretending not to cry. Behind them, barely visible through the glass reflection, was Clara. Younger. Terrified. Holding a blanket. Clara stared at the photo. I didn't know anyone took that. Daniel's voice was quiet. I did. Everyone turned to him. He looked at Rosie. I thought one day she might need proof that she was loved from the beginning. Clara's throat closed. Rosie touched the picture. That baby is me. Amelia knelt carefully beside her. Yes. Rosie looked at Clara, and Mama was there. Clara smiled through tears. Yes, sweetheart. Rosie looked at Daniel, and Carman was there. Daniel blinked. Then he laughed softly for the first time all morning. I suppose I was. Everett picked up the sealed envelope. His name was written across it. Not in Amelia's handwriting. In Richard Hale. Everett opened it with visible effort. Inside was another letter, shorter than the one from the nursery. He read silently at first, but his expression changed with every line. Amelia touched his sleeve. What does it say? Everett swallowed. Then he read aloud. Everett, if this reaches you, Amelia trusted the right person. That means the woman who stands beside her is not staff. She is witness, protector, and family by courage. Clara froze. Everett looked at her, then continued. I have added Clara Bennett's name to this box through Henry Whitcomb, because powerful families often ignore the poor until the poor become the only ones honest enough to save them. Do not make that mistake. Clara lowered her eyes as tears blurred the vault floor. Everett's voice grew rougher. The hard drive contains copies of the Foundation records, medical transfer orders, altered birth documents, and audio recordings of Preston Vale discussing the concealment of Daniel and the handling of Amelia. Use everything. Protect the children first. Protect the name last, if at all. Daniel exhaled slowly. Amelia took the hard drive from the box and held it like it weighed more than steel. Then Clara noticed the smaller envelope beneath the documents. It had Rosie's name on it. Not Rose Amelia Hale. Not Rosie Bennett. Just for Rosie when the adults finally become brave. Clara's hand trembled as she picked it up. Amelia nodded, giving permission without claiming ownership. Clara opened it. Inside was a folded note and a tiny pressed white lily. The note was written in Amelia's hand. Clara read it aloud, her voice breaking. My little Rose, if you are reading this someday, it means the necklace found its way home. I am your first mother, but if Clara kept you safe, then never let anyone tell you love must choose only one name. A child can be born from one heart and raised by another, and both hearts can be true. Amelia covered her mouth. Everett bowed his head. Rosie leaned against Clara, listening with solemn eyes. Clara continued. If I do not return quickly, it is not because I left you. It is because someone wanted truth to disappear. Be kind, but not silent. Be gentle, but not afraid. And if you ever meet your brother and sister, sing to them. They will know you. The vault went silent. Noah and Nora stared at Rosie. Rosie looked at them. Then she hummed one soft note of the lullaby. Nora began crying quietly. Noah took Rosie's hand. Clara folded the note carefully and pressed it to her heart. Amelia whispered, I wrote that before Reeves came into the room. I thought I had minutes. Clara looked at her. You gave her a lifetime. Amelia shook her head through tears. You did. For a moment, the two mothers simply looked at one another over the child they both loved. Then Everett lifted the hard drive and turned to the officer beside them. Take this directly into evidence, he said. Chain of custody documented from this moment. The officer nodded and sealed it. Mr. Ellery cleared his throat nervously. There is one more item. Everett looked at him. What item? The bank manager reached into the back of the box and removed a thin folder. This was added by Henry Whitcomb, he said. It has instructions to deliver only when box 714 is opened by both authorized holders. Daniel stepped closer. Henry Whitcomb, the lawyer who never made it to the hospital. Mr. Ellery nodded. He was a client of the bank. He left this before he disappeared. Disappeared? Everett asked. Mr. Ellery's eyes dropped. The official record says he died in a car accident. Daniel's face hardened. Official records have lied all night. Everett opened the folder. Inside was a notarized statement, a copy of a police report, and a photograph of a damaged black sedan. At the bottom of the statement was one line underlined in red. If I am found dead before delivering this, investigate Dr. Clayton Reeves and Judge Alastair Monroe. Amelia's face went pale. Everett looked up slowly. Judge Monroe. Daniel's jaw tightened. He handled my childhood placement order. Clara felt the vault grow colder. Meaning he helped make Daniel disappear, she said. And possibly helped cover Amelia's transfer, Everett added. The officer beside them straightened. Judge Alastair Monroe is still active. Everett's eyes darkened. Then this is not over. Rosie tugged Clara's sleeve. Mama, she whispered, is there another bad person? Clara crouched and held her gently by the shoulders. There may be, she said honestly, but there are more people telling the truth now. Rosie thought about that. Then she looked at Everett. You are telling now. Everett knelt before her. Yes, he said, all of it. Rosie touched the necklace, then no more wall. Everett's eyes filled. No more walls. When they left the vault, the morning had turned bright outside, but the brightness did not make the truth lighter. The press was waiting harder now. Somehow, word had spread that Amelia had entered the bank alive. Cameras flashed as they stepped out through the back entrance, and reporters shouted from behind the police barrier. Mr. Hale, did your mother kidnap Amelia West? Is the Hale Foundation under investigation? Is the Maid's child your daughter? Who is Clara Bennett? That last question made Clara stop. Everett noticed. He could have answered for her. The old Everett Hale might have. Instead, he stepped aside. The cameras shifted toward Clara. Her first instinct was to hide Rosie behind her body, but Amelia stood on one side and Daniel on the other, while Everett held Noah and Nora back from the crowd. Clara was not alone. A reporter called again, Miss Bennett, who are you in this story? Clara's hands shook, but she lifted her chin. I am the woman people overlooked, she said, and sometimes the person you overlook is the one carrying the truth. The cameras went still. It was not a polished answer. It was not prepared by lawyers. That was why it landed. Another reporter shouted, what lesson should people take from this? Clara looked at Rosie, then at Amelia, then at Everett. That children should never suffer because adults worship money, reputation, or family names, she said, and poor people should not have to become useful before they are treated as human. No one spoke for a second. Then the questions erupted again. Everett moved forward and raised one hand. My family will release a full statement, he said. Evidence has been turned over to the police. Amelia West is alive. Daniel Cross is my brother. Clara Bennett protected my daughter and the truth when this family failed to do both. Anyone involved, no matter their title, will be exposed. A reporter shouted, even Judge Monroe. Everett's eyes did not flicker. Especially Judge Monroe. That statement traveled through the crowd like fire. By the time they returned to the mansion, the whole country seemed to know the name Clara Bennett. But fame did not comfort her. It frightened her. That afternoon, while attorneys reviewed evidence and police prepared new warrants, Clara took Rosie to the staff cottage behind the estate. She needed air. She needed quiet. She needed one room where marble did not echo every fear back at her. The cottage looked smaller than ever after the mansion, but to Clara, it felt more honest. A chipped mug sat by the sink. Rosie's drawings covered the refrigerator. A basket of laundry waited near the chair. The bed was unmade because they had left too quickly the night before. This was not wealth, but it was home. Rosie ran to her little shelf and picked up a wooden block. Can Noah and Nora come here? Clara smiled sadly. Maybe later. Rosie turned. Will we live in the big house now? Clara did not answer quickly. That was the question sitting beneath every other question. Where did they belong now? Before Clara could speak, there was a knock at the cottage door. She opened it and found Everett standing outside. Alone. No security. No lawyer. No billionaire mask. Just a tired man holding a folded paper. I didn't want to come in without asking, he said. Clara stepped aside. You can come in. Everett entered slowly, looking around the small cottage with an expression that made Clara defensive at first. But there was no judgment in his eyes. Only humility. This is where she grew up, he said. Yes. He looked at Rosie's drawings. She drew the mansion. Clara glanced at the refrigerator. The drawing showed the big house, but behind it was a tiny cottage with flowers, a moon, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Clara's throat tightened. Everett noticed the 3 figures, you, Rosie, and... Clara hesitated. She used to draw the singing lady before I knew what it meant. Everett closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he handed Clara the folded paper. What is this? She asked. A legal protection document. Not custody, not control, protection. He spoke carefully. It says no one from my family, my legal team, or the state can remove Rosie from your care without a full hearing, your representation, Amelia's statement, and Rosie's best interest review. Clara stared at him. Everett continued. Amelia insisted. Daniel agreed. I signed it. Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. He added quietly, I know paper does not erase fear, but it can stop powerful people from acting too quickly. Clara looked down at the document. For years, papers had endangered everyone. Birth certificates, transfer orders, fake medical records, hidden ledgers. Now, for the first time, paper was being used to protect instead of erase. Thank you, she whispered. Everett nodded. There's more. Clara's stomach tightened. Everett saw it, not a demand. He looked toward Rosie, who was making her blocks into a crooked tower. Amelia wants you and Rosie to stay close while everyone heals. So do the twins. So do I, but close does not have to mean swallowed by the mansion. Clara looked at him, confused. Everett glanced out the cottage window toward the neglected garden behind it. There is an old guest house beyond the orchard. It is separate from the main house, larger than this, but not part of the staff wing. It can be yours if you want it. In your name, no conditions. Clara stepped back. Mr. Hale. Everett, he said gently. She shook her head. I can't accept a house. You can refuse it, he said, but please do not refuse it because you think people like you are allowed only small rooms. The words struck her. Clara looked around the cottage where she had loved Rosie fiercely, but also counted coins, patched blankets, and prayed the heater would survive winter. She had not been ashamed of the cottage, but she had sometimes mistaken hardship for virtue because it was the only thing she could afford. Everett's voice softened. This is not charity, this is restitution. Clara looked at him sharply. Restitution for what? For a world where you had to risk everything before anyone believed you. Clara's eyes filled, but she did not answer. Rosie suddenly ran over and held up a block to Everett. Make the tower not fall, she said. Everett looked startled, then knelt. I can try. Clara watched the billionaire, who had once seemed untouchable, sit on the floor of her small cottage, carefully balancing wooden blocks, while the child who might be his daughter instructed him with serious authority. Not that one, Rosie said. That one is wobbly. Everett changed the block. Rosie nodded. Good listening. Clara nearly laughed. Everett looked up at her, and for one brief moment, grief stepped aside. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen and stood. His expression changed. What happened? Clara asked. Judge Monroe has agreed to speak to investigators, Everett said, but only if he speaks to me first. Clara frowned. Why? Everett looked toward the mansion. Because he says he knows where Grace Holloway is. Daniel's mother. The woman everyone thought had been forced into silence forever. Clara's heart began to pound. Is she alive? Everett's face held hope and fear in equal measure. He says she is. Rosie looked up from her blocks. The lost mama, she asked. Everett stared at her. Clara did too. Rosie picked up the toy car Daniel had left on the table earlier and placed it at the top of the block tower. She's waiting by water, Rosie said. Everett's phone buzzed again. This time he put it on speaker. Daniel's voice came through, shaken. Everett, Monroe gave them an address. Everett gripped the phone. Where? Daniel breathed once. Maine, a lighthouse near Holloway Bay. Clara looked at Rosie. Rosie smiled sleepily. Water, she whispered. And for the first time, the next secret did not feel like a trap. It felt like a mother waiting to be found. By sunset, the Hale private jet landed in Maine, but no one stepped off it feeling rich. Everett carried old guilt in his silence. Daniel carried a toy car in his coat pocket. Amelia carried Rosie's letter in her hand. Clara carried Rosie on her hip, but this time she did not feel like a maid being brought along by powerful people. She felt like a witness, a mother, and a woman whose courage had earned her place in the truth. The address Judge Monroe had given them led to Holloway Bay, a quiet coastal town where the wind smelled of salt, pine, and old stories. A narrow road curved toward a white lighthouse standing above dark rocks, and beside it sat a small cottage with blue shutters and a garden full of wildflowers. Daniel stopped before the gate. For a long moment, he only stared. Everett stood beside him, saying nothing, because some doors could not be opened for another person. Daniel's voice was low. What if she doesn't want to see me? Clara shifted Rosie gently. A mother can be afraid, but that does not mean she stopped loving. Daniel looked at her. That sentence did not come from wealth, law, or inheritance. It came from 3 years of raising a child, while fearing the truth might take her away. Daniel nodded, then opened the gates. Before he could knock, the cottage door opened. An elderly woman stood there with silver hair pulled back loosely, a shawl around her shoulders, and one hand pressed to the doorframe as if her body had recognized the visitors before her eyes could accept them. She looked at Daniel. The world seemed to stop. The woman whispered, "Danny." Daniel's face broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. He simply became the 6-year-old boy the mansion had stolen. "Mom," he said. Grace Holloway stepped forward, trembling, and Daniel crossed the distance between them. When they embraced, Everett looked away, but Clara saw his jaw tighten. He was not jealous of Daniel's reunion. He was mourning every year his brother had been denied it. Grace held Daniel's face in both hands. "They told me you were safe if I stayed away," she said, crying. "They told me if I came back, Vivian would send you somewhere worse. I wrote letters, I begged lawyers, then Judge Monroe said you had died." Daniel closed his eyes. "I thought you left me." Grace shook her head hard. "Never." Rosie leaned against Clara's shoulder and whispered, "The lost mama found him." Grace noticed the toddler then. Her eyes moved to the necklace and her breath caught. "That song," she whispered, "I heard it in my dreams last night." Amelia stepped forward slowly. Grace looked at her and covered her mouth. "You look like my sister." Amelia's eyes filled. "Your sister was my mother." Grace reached for her, and Amelia went willingly. Another broken branch of the family was joined. Everett remained near the gate, uncertain whether he belonged inside this reunion. Grace saw him and studied his face. For a moment, fear flashed in her eyes because he carried the Hale features, the Hale posture, and the Hale history. Then she looked closer and saw the difference. "You are Richard's boy," she said. Everett swallowed, "Not by blood." Grace's gaze softened. "Love can be blood when it protects. Richard loved you." Everett's eyes lowered. "I wish he had protected Daniel sooner," he said. Grace nodded sadly. So did he. That honest answer hurt, but it also healed something because it did not pretend pain had been simple. Inside the cottage, Grace made tea with shaking hands, while Daniel sat at the kitchen table like a man, afraid to touch anything in case the room vanished. The walls were covered with small paintings of the sea. On one shelf sat a wooden horse, old and worn. Daniel noticed it immediately. Grace followed his gaze. "Your father sent it before Vivian found out he was writing." Daniel took the toy from the shelf. His hand trembled around it. "I had one like this in the nursery." Grace nodded. "He bought two, one for each home he hoped you would have." Everett sat across from Daniel, and for the first time, the brothers looked at each other without the mansion between them. Grace opened an old tin box and removed bundles of letters tied with blue thread. "Richard wrote everything," she said, "about Vivian, about Preston, about the foundation, about trying to find a way to bring Daniel home without causing more danger." Everett leaned forward. "Why didn't those letters surface before?" Grace looked down. "Because I was afraid. By the time I realized how deep the lies went, I had already been threatened by Monroe. He had the courts, the doctors, and the police records on his side. I had a child they told me was gone and no money to fight ghosts." Clara understood that fear. Power did not always shout. Sometimes it handed poor people official papers and dared them to argue. Grace looked at Clara. "You are the one who raised Rose." Clara nodded. "Rosie." Grace smiled gently. "Rosie then." Rosie lifted her hand in a small wave. Grace's eyes filled with tenderness. "You kept Amelia's child safe." "I kept my child safe," Clara said softly, then froze, afraid she had said too much. Amelia reached across the table and touched Clara's hand. "Our child," Amelia said. Clara looked at her. Everett looked at both women, and Clara saw in his expression that he understood something the law would take longer to learn. Motherhood was not made smaller by being shared honestly. Daniel opened one of Richard's letters and read silently. His face changed. "What is it?" Everett asked. Daniel handed him the page. Everett read the first lines, then stopped. Grace looked between them. "That letter explains why Richard never publicly fought Vivian." Everett continued reading aloud. "Preston holds proof of Everett's birth and has threatened to use it against Vivian, Daniel, and the company. Vivian is not innocent, but she is trapped by her own first lie. I must move carefully, or Preston will destroy both boys to protect himself." Daniel's voice hardened. He should have moved faster. Everett nodded. "Yes." Grace looked at him with sorrow. He knew that near the end. The room settled into silence. Then Grace pulled one final envelope from the tin. "This is for the children," she said. "Richard wrote it after he learned Amelia was asking questions. He believed the curse of this family would end only if the next generation heard the truth early." Everett took the envelope, but did not open it. "Not yet." He looked at Noah, Nora, and Rosie, who had fallen asleep together on Grace's small sofa beneath a handmade quilt. "They deserve mourning before another secret," he said. For the first time, Daniel smiled faintly. "That may be the wisest thing Ahale has said all week." Everett returned the small smile. "Then perhaps I'm learning from the brother who survived without the name." Daniel looked down, moved despite himself. Outside, waves struck the rocks below the lighthouse. Amelia stood and walked to the window, watching the water turn silver beneath the moon. Clara joined her. For a while, neither woman spoke. Then Amelia said quietly, I used to think getting back to Everett and the twins would fix everything. Clara looked at her, and now I know love does not erase what happened. It only gives us a place to begin after it. Clara nodded. Amelia turned to her. Are you afraid of what comes next? Yes, Clara admitted. Me too. That honesty made them both smile a little. Behind them, Daniel and Grace sat side by side, touching hands as if proving to themselves that time had not stolen the right to hold on. Everett stood near the door, speaking quietly with the police officer who had traveled with them. Judge Monroe's testimony, Grace's letters, the bank evidence, and Richard's recording would now become part of a criminal investigation too large for anyone to bury quietly. But the biggest change was not legal. It was moral. The Hale family had spent decades protecting its image. Now, for the first time, it was protecting people. Near midnight, Rosie woke and slipped from the sofa. She walked to Daniel and placed the toy car in his palm. You found your mama, she said sleepily, so the boy doesn't need to be sad in the old room. Daniel's eyes filled again. Grace looked at the child with wonder. Who taught you to speak like that? Rosie pointed to Clara, then Amelia. My mamas, she said. The room went still. Clara's breath caught. Amelia's eyes filled. Everett bowed his head, overwhelmed. Noah, half awake, whispered, We have two mamas too now. Nora nodded against Amelia's side, and Rosie has us. Grace smiled through tears. Then this family is already richer than the old one ever was. The next morning, as the sun rose over Holloway Bay, Daniel walked with Grace along the water, while Everett followed a few steps behind. Not leading, not commanding, just present. Grace stopped near the lighthouse and turned to both men. I cannot give you back the years, she said, but I can give you the truth about them. Daniel looked at Everett. Everett looked at Daniel. Then Daniel reached into his pocket, took out the toy car, and placed it in Everett's hand. I don't need to race you for the house, he said. I need you to help me rebuild what they took. Everett closed his fingers around the car. I will. Daniel held his gaze, not as charity. As brothers, Everett said. Daniel nodded once. And that was enough for the morning. When they returned to the cottage, the police officer was waiting with a call. Judge Monroe had signed a full cooperation agreement. Preston's offshore accounts had been frozen. Dr. Reeves's medical license had been suspended pending investigation. Vivian Hale had requested to speak to Amelia before her formal arraignment. Amelia's face changed at the last sentence. Everett immediately said, You do not owe her that. Amelia looked at the sleeping children through the cottage window. No, she said, I do not owe her, but I owe myself the chance to leave that room behind. Clara understood. Some people sought forgiveness to escape guilt. Some victims faced them not to forgive, but to reclaim the final word. Amelia turned to Clara. Will you come with me? Clara looked surprised. Me. Amelia nodded. You carried my daughter out of the darkness when I couldn't. I don't want to walk into that room alone. Clara took her hand. Then you won't. By noon, they prepared to return to New York. Grace agreed to come with them, not to live in the mansion, but to stand beside Daniel when the truth became public. Before leaving, Rosie ran back to the cottage garden and picked one wildflower. She gave it to Grace. For the old sad, she said. Grace knelt and kissed her forehead. Thank you, little Rose. Rosie smiled. I'm Rosie. Grace laughed softly. Yes, Rosie. As the cars pulled away from Holloway Bay, Clara looked back at the lighthouse. The next battle waited in New York. Vivian's confession. Judge Monroe's exposure. The public fall of the corrupt foundation. the final decision about Rosie's future. But for the first time, the story was no longer moving through darkness. It was moving toward judgment, healing, and a home rebuilt on truth. And in the back seat, between Noah and Nora, Rosie hummed the lullaby one more time. Not to calm fear this time, but to remind everyone that what was lost could still be found. By the time they returned to New York, the Hale mansion no longer looked like a private estate. It looked like the center of a storm. Police cars stood near the gate. News vans crowded the road. Reporters shouted from behind barricades, and helicopters circled above the trees like impatient vultures waiting for the final fall of a famous family. Inside the house, however, the loudest thing was silence. Not peaceful silence. Waiting silence. The kind that comes before a confession. Amelia sat in the library with Clara beside her, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had changed into a simple cream dress Mrs. Voss found in one of the guest suites, but no dress could hide the years stolen from her face or the strength returning to her eyes. Everett stood near the fireplace with Daniel and Grace. Noah, Nora, and Rosie were in the next room with Miss Alden, coloring quietly at a table under the watch of 2 officers. The door stayed open because Nora had refused another closed door, and no adult in the house had the heart to argue. Vivian Hale waited in the small formal sitting room under police supervision. She had asked to see Amelia. Amelia had agreed. Everett had not liked it, but he had not stopped her. That alone showed Clara how much had changed. The old Hale way was control disguised as protection. The new way had to begin with choice. Amelia stood. Clara stood with her. Everett stepped forward. I can come in with you. Amelia looked at him gently. No. He stopped. I need Clara, she said, not because I don't trust you, but because she knows what it means to stand in a room where powerful people expect you to be afraid. Clara's throat tightened. Everett looked at Clara, then nodded. I'll be right outside, he said. Amelia gave him a small smile. This time I know. The words hurt him, but they also healed something because she said them without bitterness. Clara walked with Amelia down the hall. At the sitting room door, Amelia paused. For 3 years, Vivian had been more than a woman. She had been a locked door, a hidden wall, a stolen morning, a grandmother who let children cry for a mother she had buried alive. Now she sat inside that room as a prisoner of her own choices. Clara touched Amelia's arm. You don't have to forgive her. Amelia looked at the door. I know. You don't have to be kind. I know that too. Then what do you need? Amelia breathed in slowly. I need her to hear my voice while I am free. Clara nodded. They entered. Vivian sat near the window, no diamonds now, no silver gown, no commanding posture. She wore a plain dark dress and looked smaller than the woman who had once ruled the mansion with a glance. But Clara did not mistake smallness for innocence. Some people looked harmless only after their power had been taken away. Vivian's eyes rose to Amelia first, then to Clara. For a second, old pride flickered. Then it died. Amelia, Vivian whispered. Amelia remained standing. You asked to see me. Vivian's hands twisted together. I wanted to say I am sorry. Clara watched Amelia's face carefully. Amelia did not soften. For what? Amelia asked. Vivian blinked. For everything. No, Amelia said quietly. Not everything, name it. Vivian's eyes filled. The room seemed to tighten around the demand. Amelia stepped closer, but her voice stayed steady. Say you locked me away. Vivian swallowed. I locked you away. Say you let my children believe I abandoned them. Vivian's lips trembled. I let them believe you abandoned them. Say you knew Rosie was my baby. Vivian closed her eyes. I knew. Clara's hand curled into a fist at her side. Amelia's voice shook now, but it did not break. Say you looked at my daughter in Clara's arms and cared more about your secret than her life. Vivian sobbed once. I did. The confessions sat between them, ugly and necessary. Amelia looked at her for a long time. Then she said, I will not carry your guilt for you. Vivian looked up. I will not let hatred turn me into another prisoner, Amelia continued. But forgiveness is not a key I owe you. If it ever comes, it will come for my peace, not your comfort. Vivian lowered her head. Clara felt the power of that sentence move through the room. It was not revenge. It was freedom. Vivian looked at Clara then. You saved her. Clara did not answer. Vivian's voice became smaller. You saved the baby. Yes, Clara said. Vivian flinched at the bluntness. You also had chances to save them, Clara added. You had money, guards, lawyers, influence, and a whole mansion. I had a hospital mop, a newborn baby, and a bus pass. Do not make me sound heroic so you can make yourself sound helpless. Vivian stared at her. For once, the poor maid's words left the rich woman speechless. Amelia turned toward the door. I am done. Vivian panicked. Please, Amelia, wait. Amelia stopped, but did not turn. Vivian's voice cracked. What will you tell the children about me? Amelia looked over her shoulder. The truth, she said, but not with cruelty. I will not poison them to punish you. You already gave this family enough poison. Then Amelia opened the door. Everett stood outside, his face tight with emotion. Amelia walked into his arms. Clara followed, closing the door behind them. Vivian's sobs remained inside. Not hidden anymore. Just unheard by choice. The public statement happened 1 hour later. Everett refused the grand ballroom. He refused the marble steps. He chose the front lawn, where servants, reporters, police officers, neighbors, former foundation workers, and ordinary people could stand on the same ground. That choice alone made headlines before he said a word. The cameras faced him. Daniel stood to his right. Amelia stood to his left. Clara stood beside Amelia, holding Rosie's hand. Noah and Nora stood close to their mother, while Grace Holloway watched from behind Daniel, one hand pressed to her heart. Everett stepped to the microphone. For a moment, the reporters shouted over one another. Mr. Hale, is Amelia West alive? Was your mother involved? Is Clara Bennett the mother of your child? Is the Hale Foundation criminally corrupt? Did Judge Monroe falsify court records? Everett raised one hand. The shouting faded. He looked tired. Not weak. Tired in the way honest men look when they stop holding up a lie. My name is Everett Hale, he began. For most of my life, that name opened doors, silenced questions, and protected me from truths other people were forced to survive. The crowd quieted. Last night I learned that the woman I loved, Amelia West, did not abandon me or our children. She was hidden, drugged, and imprisoned inside my own home because she discovered corruption inside the Hale Foundation. Cameras flashed violently. Everett did not blink. The evidence has been turned over to law enforcement. Preston Vale, Dr. Clayton Reeves, Vivian Hale, and others connected to the scheme are under investigation. Judge Alastair Monroe is cooperating with authorities concerning falsified placement orders, altered records, and the disappearance of Daniel Cross, who is my brother. A roar of questions erupted. Everett kept speaking. My family name was used to steal from children, silence women, erase the poor, and protect powerful criminals. I will not defend that name. I will repair what I can and expose what I cannot repair. He turned slightly toward Clara. Clara Bennett, who worked in my home as a maid, protected Amelia's daughter, and preserved evidence when people with more power chose silence. She is not a footnote in this story. She is one of the reasons truth survived. The cameras turned to Clara. Her heart pounded, but Rosie squeezed her hand. Everett continued. The Hale Foundation will be dissolved in its current form. Every account will be audited independently. Stolen funds will be returned. A new trust will be created for the children, patients, workers, and families harmed by this corruption. It will not be led by my family alone. It will include public oversight, former staff, medical advocates, and community representatives. A reporter shouted, "Are you stepping down?" Everett looked directly at him. "Yes, from all Foundation control until the investigation is complete." Another reporter shouted, "Are you admitting guilt?" "I am admitting responsibility," Everett said. "Legal guilt belongs to those who committed crimes. Moral responsibility belongs to every person who benefited from silence and looked away too long." Daniel glanced at him. This time, respect showed plainly. Then Amelia stepped to the microphone. Her presence changed the air. People leaned forward. For years, she had been a rumor, a tragedy, a missing woman in old articles. Now she spoke for herself. "My name is Amelia West," she said. "I was told my voice would never leave a locked room. Today, I want every person watching to understand this. When someone with power calls a woman unstable, a poor person dishonest, or a child confused, do not accept it without asking who benefits from that story." Clara felt those words deep in her chest. Amelia's voice remained calm, but her eyes shone. "I survived because Clara Bennett believed a frightened woman in a hospital bed. My children survived because love remembered what power tried to erase. And I stand here not because the Hale family saved me, but because truth finally became louder than fear." The reporters went silent. Then Clara heard a small voice beside her. "Mama, do you have to talk too?" Clara looked down at Rosie. The toddler's face was serious. Clara had no prepared speech. No media training. No family lawyer whispering in her ear. But she remembered the reporter outside the bank asking, "Who are you in this story?" This time, Clara stepped forward by choice. Everett moved aside. Amelia touched her back gently. Clara stood before the microphones. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said, and her voice shook only at first. "I used to think survival meant staying quiet. Poor people are taught that. Workers are taught that. Women with children are taught that. We are told not to make trouble because trouble costs money we do not have." The crowd became still. "But silence has a cost too," Clara continued. "Sometimes the cost is a woman behind a wall. Sometimes it is a child without her mother. Sometimes it is a boy erased from his own name. Sometimes it is a whole foundation stealing from the people it claims to help." She looked down at Rosie. Rosie smiled up at her. Clara looked back at the cameras. "I am not powerful, but I learned that truth does not become weak just because it is carried by poor hands." For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone in the crowd began clapping. Not a reporter. Not a donor. One of the kitchen staff. Then Mrs. Voss. Then a nurse from one of the hospitals. Then more people. The applause rose slowly, not like celebration, but like recognition. Clara stepped back, overwhelmed. Everett did not take the microphone again immediately. He let the applause belong to her. That was the first public sign that the old order of the mansion had truly changed. By evening, the consequences began moving faster than anyone expected. Preston Vale's accounts were frozen. Dr. Reeves's hospital privileges were suspended pending criminal charges. Judge Monroe resigned before midnight, but resignation did not protect him from investigation. Vivian Hale was formally charged, and although her lawyers tried to frame her as a manipulated woman under Preston's control, Amelia's testimony, Daniel's records, Richard's video, the bank evidence, and Vivian's own admissions made silence impossible. The news did what news always did. It simplified. It sensationalized. It repeated Clara's name until strangers online called her a hero, a liar, an angel, an opportunist, a mother, a maid, and a miracle. Clara tried not to read any of it. She sat instead in the orchard behind the guest house Everett had offered her, watching Rosie chase fireflies with Noah and Nora while Amelia rested on a bench nearby. The guest house lights glowed warmly behind them. It was not a mansion. It was not a cottage. It was something in between. A beginning. Everett approached from the path with Daniel beside him. The two men had spent the afternoon with investigators, lawyers, and auditors, but now they looked less like heirs and more like brothers learning how to stand near each other without history pushing them apart. Daniel sat beside Grace under the apple tree. Grace touched his shoulder and smiled. Everett remained standing near Clara. The emergency custody protection was accepted by the court, he said softly. No one can remove Rosie from you while the family case is reviewed. Clara exhaled. She had not realized she was holding her breath until that moment. And the DNA test, she asked. Everett looked toward Rosie. She is Amelia's daughter, he said, and mine. The words landed softly but deeply. Clara watched Rosie laugh as Noah placed a firefly gently into her cupped hands. I knew, Clara whispered, but hearing it. I know. Clara's eyes filled. Everett sat beside her, leaving enough space for respect. I will not pretend this is simple, he said. I want to know her, I want to be her father. Amelia wants to be her mother. The twins already love her, but none of that erases you. Clara wiped her cheek quickly. I'm scared that one day she'll choose the big house and forget the small one. Everett looked toward the children. She won't, he said, because the small one is where she learned love before she learned inheritance. Clara glanced at him. That answer surprised her. Everett smiled faintly. I am learning. Across the grass, Rosie suddenly ran toward them. She climbed into Clara's lap first, then reached one hand toward Everett. Daddy Everett, she said, Noah says fireflies are stars that came down. Everett froze at the word daddy. Clara felt it too. A little ache. A little gift. A little change. Everett's voice softened. What do you think? Rosie looked at the glowing insect in her hands. I think they're tiny nightlights. Clara smiled through tears. You always say that about the moon. Rosie nodded proudly. God has big ones and little ones. Everett laughed softly. Not the public laugh of a rich man at a gala. A father's laugh. Amelia watched from the bench, her eyes full. Then Nora called, Rosie, come back. Rosie kissed Clara's cheek, then ran back to the twins. Everett looked after her. She called me daddy, he whispered. Clara nodded. She did. Are you all right? Clara thought about lying. Then she chose the new family rule. Truth. It hurt, she said, but it was beautiful too. Everett nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me honestly. A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Amelia rose from the bench and walked toward them. She looked stronger than she had that morning, but tiredness still shadowed her face. I spoke to the therapist, she said. She can meet with all of us tomorrow, not just the children, adults too. Everett nodded. Good. Clara looked surprised. All of us. Amelia sat beside her. Rosie should not have to carry adult confusion alone, and neither should you. Clara's eyes lowered. For most of her life, help had come with judgment. But this felt different. This felt like rebuilding, with everyone allowed to admit where the walls were cracked. Daniel approached with grace. "I'll come too," he said. Everett looked at him. "You." Daniel shrugged. "I spent 30 years pretending I didn't need anyone. It didn't make me wise, it made me tired." Grace smiled. Clara laughed softly. Even Everett smiled. The night air felt gentler now. But the story still needed one final act. Not legal. Not public. Personal. The children had to understand where they belonged. The adults had to decide what kind of home would replace the one built on silence. And Rosie, the toddler whose song had opened every locked room, had to be given the one thing no secret could ever steal again. A family that would not make her choose between the people who loved her. As the fireflies rose above the orchard, Amelia reached for Clara's hand. Clara took it. Everett placed his hand over both of theirs, not as owner, not as rescuer, but as a man asking permission to be part of the circle. Across the grass, Noah, Nora, and Rosie began humming the lullaby together. This time, no one cried. But everyone listened. Because the song that once exposed the mansion's secrets was becoming something new. A promise. 6 months later, the Hale mansion opened its gates again. But this time, there were no champagne towers, no fake charity speeches, no guests pretending not to hear children crying behind closed doors. This time, the front lawn was filled with hospital workers, former foundation families, investigators, teachers, social workers, servants, neighbors, and children who had once been used as photographs in charity brochures, but forgotten when the cameras left. Everett Hale stood before them, not as the untouchable billionaire he had once been, but as a man who had finally learned that power without truth was only another locked room. Behind him, the old Hale Foundation sign had been removed. In its place stood a new name. The Rose and Grace Trust for Children and Families. It was named for Rosie, whose necklace revealed the truth, and Grace, whose stolen motherhood reminded everyone that poor women's pain should never be buried beneath rich families' reputations. Clara stood near the front, with Rosie holding one hand and Amelia holding the other. For months, people had asked what Clara was now. Was she still the maid? Was she the adoptive mother? Was she the witness? Was she part of the Hale family? Clara no longer rushed to answer. She had learned that people who needed simple labels often struggled with powerful truths. She was Rosie's mother. Amelia was Rosie's mother. Everett was Rosie's father. And Rosie was loved enough that no adult had to win by making another adult disappear. The court had understood that too. After long hearings, testimonies, therapy reports, and Amelia's own request, a shared guardianship agreement had been approved. Clara remained Rosie's legal mother, Amelia and Everett were restored as her biological parents, and Rosie's life would be built around stability, honesty, and love. It was unusual. It made headlines. But for Rosie, it was simple. She had 2 mamas, one daddy Everett, one brother Noah, one sister Nora, one uncle Daniel, one grandma Grace, and a house where no one was allowed to hide behind silence anymore. Vivian Hale had pleaded guilty to multiple charges in exchange for testimony against Preston Vale, Dr. Reeves, and Judge Monroe. Preston's empire collapsed first. Then Reeves lost his license and faced trial for falsifying medical records and unlawful confinement. Judge Monroe's resignation did not save him. His old rulings were reopened, and families he had harmed began receiving the justice they thought would never come. Daniel Cross testified publicly. He did not speak like a bitter man. He spoke like a boy finally allowed to say he had existed. Grace sat behind him during every hearing, holding the same wooden horse Richard Hale had once sent her. Sometimes Daniel still looked back at her during hard questions, and every time she nodded as if to say, "I am here now." That was enough. Amelia healed slowly. Some days she laughed with the children in the garden. Other days, the sound of a lock turning still made her go quiet. Everett learned not to rush her healing. Clara learned not to apologize for her own pain. The children learned that adults could be sad and still safe, broken and still loving, afraid and still honest. The old nursery was no longer sealed. Everett had ordered the room restored, but not erased. The road rug remained. The wooden horse was polished. The music box was repaired. And on the wall, instead of portraits of powerful men, Amelia hung a framed sentence from Richard Hale's final recording. "Protect the children first, protect the name last, if at all." Every child in the house knew that sentence. Even Rosie. Especially Rosie. On the morning of the trust opening, Rosie stood in the old nursery wearing a pale yellow dress and the blue teardrop necklace. Clara knelt in front of her and adjusted the collar. "Too tight?" Clara asked. Rosie shook her head, "No." Amelia stood by the window, watching them with soft eyes. "Are you ready?" Amelia asked. Rosie looked at both women. "Will people ask about the necklace?" "Yes," Clara said. "And about the song?" Rosie asked. "Probably," Amelia answered. Rosie thought about it very seriously. Then she said, "I'll tell them the song was for finding people." Clara smiled through sudden tears. Amelia crossed the room and took Rosie's small face gently in her hands. "That is exactly what it did." Noah and Nora burst into the doorway then, dressed neatly but already slightly messy from running through the hall. "Rosie," Noah said, "Daddy says it's time." Nora looked at the necklace and smiled. "Mommy's necklace looks pretty on you." Rosie touched the blue stone. "It's for all of us now." Amelia closed her eyes for a moment. Then she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "it is." Downstairs, Everett waited near the front doors. When Clara, Amelia, Rosie, Noah, and Nora came down together, he looked at them, as if the staircase had become the answer to every prayer he had been too proud to speak. Daniel stood beside him. Grace stood beside Daniel. Mrs. Voss stood near the servants' hallway, but Clara noticed she no longer hid there. Everett had promoted her into the new trust's household advocate role, helping workers report abuse, unfair treatment, and unsafe conditions without fear. The mansion had not become perfect. No house ever did. But it had become accountable. That mattered more. Everett opened the front door. Sunlight poured in. For years, that house had swallowed truth. Now truth walked out through the front door, holding a toddler's hand. Outside, the crowd grew quiet when they appeared. Everett stepped to the microphone first. He spoke briefly this time. No polished performance. No billionaire confidence hiding pain. Just truth. "This house once taught people to protect appearances," he said. "Today, we begin teaching our children to protect people. The trust we open today will serve children, families, workers, and witnesses who are often ignored because they do not have money, status, or a famous name. We cannot undo every harm caused here, but we can make sure this house never again profits from silence." Then he turned to Clara. The crowd followed his gaze. Clara's heart beat hard, but she did not step back. She walked to the microphone with Rosie beside her. For a moment, Clara looked at the mansion, then at the people on the lawn, then at the child whose tiny hands had changed all their lives. "My name is Clara Bennett," she said. "I used to clean rooms in this house. Now I help make sure no room in it is used to hide pain again." The crowd went still. "I want every person listening to remember this," Clara continued. "Do not wait until someone becomes useful before you treat them as valuable. Do not wait until a poor person carries evidence before you believe they can carry truth. Do not wait until a child cries before you ask what adults have been hiding. She looked down at Rosie. Rosie squeezed her hand. Clara smiled gently. Kindness is not weakness, silence is not peace, and love is not real if it requires someone else to disappear. The applause came slowly at first, then louder. This time, Clara did not shrink from it. She accepted it, not as fame, but as witness. Then Rosie tugged the microphone down slightly. Everyone laughed softly. Rosie looked at the crowd with wide, serious eyes. My mommy Clara says tell the truth, she said. My mommy Amelia says sing when people are scared. Daddy Everett says no more walls. The crowd grew silent again. Rosie touched the necklace. So don't make walls, she said, make doors. No speech that day was more powerful. Everett looked away, overcome. Amelia covered her mouth. Daniel wiped his eyes. Clara lifted Rosie into her arms and kissed her cheek. The ribbon was cut by all three children together. Noah, Nora, and Rosie held the scissors while the adults guided their hands. When the ribbon fell, the crowd applauded and the mansion doors opened behind them. Not for rich guests only. Not for powerful friends only. For the people the old Hale family had ignored. Later that evening, when the crowd had gone and the lawn grew quiet beneath the first stars, the family gathered in the orchard behind Clara's guest house. Fireflies blinked above the grass. Grace sat beside Daniel, telling Noah and Nora stories about the sea. Amelia sat with Everett beneath the apple tree, their hands loosely joined, not pretending the past was healed, but choosing to heal anyway. Clara watched Rosie chase fireflies across the grass. After a while, Rosie ran back and climbed into her lap. Mama, she whispered, sleepy and warm. Clara kissed her hair. Yes, sweetheart. Can I sleep in the little house tonight? Clara looked toward the guest house. Then Rosie added, and tomorrow in the big house. Amelia heard and smiled. Everett did too. Clara held Rosie closer. Yes, Clara said, you can have both. Rosie nodded as if that was the most natural thing in the world. Because to her, it was. Love did not have to choose one roof. Truth did not have to belong to one class. Family did not have to be built only by blood, money, or name. Sometimes family was built by the person who stayed when staying was dangerous. Sometimes it was built by the mother who survived the wall. Sometimes by the father who finally chose truth over pride. Sometimes by the forgotten brother who came back with evidence instead of revenge. And sometimes by a toddler wearing a blue necklace, humming an old lullaby, and doing what no one expected. Rosie rested her head on Clara's shoulder. Across the orchard, Noah and Nora began humming the lullaby. Amelia joined softly. Then Grace. Then Daniel. Finally, Everett. Clara listened for a moment before adding her own voice. The song no longer sounded like grief. It sounded like home. And beneath the moonlight, the Hale mansion stood behind them with every locked room opened, every hidden name spoken, and every child safe. No one could calm the Billionaire's twins that night because the answer was never money, power, doctors, or control. The answer was truth. And truth had arrived through the poor maid's toddler. Dear viewers, this story teaches that wealth without honesty can destroy a family, but humility, courage, and kindness can rebuild what lies have broken. Clara reminds us never to judge people by status. Rosie reminds us that children often see truth before adults admit it. Amelia teaches survival, and Everett teaches that real power is choosing justice over reputation. Tell us in the comments what lesson touched you most and what you would have done in Clara's place. Subscribe for more interesting, emotional, entertaining, and educative stories like this.